This is Geek Gab with your hosts, Dorrinal, Brian Niemeier, and me, Daddy Warpig. We are back. That's right, Geek Gab, the premiere, the number one, the most awesome geekerific gabfest in the whole entire universe. Brought to you with three of the best educated, most awesome, most amazing geeks in the world. Today we are talking about all of the dungeons and all of the dragons, but before we start, I'm going to pause to take a sip of water and allow my co-hosts to get in a word or two. How are things today, Dorrinal?
Fantastic. You know, your voice is like a beacon in the deep darkness of the dungeon, leading me to treasure, danger, or hopefully the exit. And I look forward to gabbing every week. How about you, Brian?
Oh, nobody here gets out alive. That's your mistake. No. Doing well, keeping busy. Getting ready for our radio dungeon crawl.
Radio Dungeon Crawl. Oh, boy.
You had threatened, actually, at one point to run us through a role-play. What we're talking about today, folks, if you haven't pieced it together, if the subtle clues we've been throwing out have eluded you, what we're talking about today is role-playing games. And specifically, Dorrinal is starting up a 3.5 Dungeons & Dragons campaign, and we wanted to talk about that and associated different subjects. But Brian had threatened at one point to run me and Dorrinal and some other people through his own homebrew role-playing game that he made for his novel, Nefarial, the Amazon link to which is in the description.
Thank you.
Which has not arrived in the mail yet, by the way. Just letting you know.
Oh, yeah. Let me know. Some people have gotten it really fast, and some people, like, toward the outer edge of the estimated delivery time, so keep me posted on that.
I'm one of those horrible, horrible heavy readers who just decided that, for the most part, paper was bad for me, so I stopped buying books on paper.
Print is dead.
An Amazon Kindle will never give you a paper cut.
True.
In any case, yeah, you haven't answered my question. In fact, you changed the subject, I think. Or maybe it was Dorrinal who changed the subject.
That was my fault.
Okay.
You had threatened at some point to run us through a session of your homebrew role-playing game. Is that still in the offing?
Sure.
Because at some point, if we have time, we can do a Geek Gab Let's Play just on your game, and it'd be longer than a normal show, and we'd only do it, every now and then when we needed to. But we could set something up where set up a little hangout and in D20 online and let you run your game. Would that work? Have you done that before?
I have not done that before, but I'm willing to try.
Well, it's very encouraging to see all the people on Twitch TV doing that. I'm sure there's other services like that. Playing D&D every day. I could never stand watching. I don't mean to turn off all of our potential audience. I don't know what anybody sees in it, but actually playing is a lot of fun, isn't it?
I enjoy it. I don't get to do that enough, especially recently.
Yeah, life happens.
So, speaking of life happens, I was trying to set up this game at work, but then I remembered that life happens all the time. And I ran into a great article pointed to me by Daddy Warpig about how can you run a role-playing game like D&D with a revolving cast of people. Because you can't get the same 4 or 5 people to commit to week in, week out for weeks and weeks.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. I set up this game at work. As I'm doing it, of course, I realize that I've achieved peak nerd. But it feels good, man. So the idea is of the campaign is the open table campaign. And so what you do is you get a bunch of people who are interested in playing D&D, but who aren't interested in committing to the whole, solo campaign where, you play for like 2 years straight. The idea is that you start with a large dungeon, not the kind of thing that you can clear in one sitting, not the kind of thing that you can clear in 10 sittings.
Right.
Was this the article on the Alexandrian?
Yeah, that's the one.
Opening your game table?
Opening your gaming table.
Okay, I will plop a link to that in the description so people can check that out.
Nice.
Awesome, thanks. So the idea is, opening your gaming table, is that you have this huge dungeon that can't be cleared reasonably, in a reasonable amount of time. In fact, monsters will come in and repopulate the sections of the dungeon you have cleared by the time you get to the later portions of the dungeon. The next thing that makes this work is that there's a nearby town where your players can form adventuring parties and buy and sell goods and train, etc.
An adventuring hub, as they call it in computer games.
Yeah, exactly. Then the last rule that sort of ties it all together is that you just have a rule that says, well, as long as the path to the entrance of the dungeon is clear, at the end of the session, everybody just goes home. So that next time, it doesn't matter who shows up, right? Whoever shows up to play that week picks the character they want to play, and you all get together and do it again. If it sounds a little light, if it sounds a little Diablo-like, yeah, I guess it is. But it's a great way to play without. It's a great way to play as adults.
Yeah.
And the thing is, too, if you wanted to, with that setup, you don't have to, because the sneer, when you talk about Diablo-like, oh, there's no real role-playing, that's BS. You can have as much role-playing as you want in a dungeon crawl. You can run into, just in the dungeon, and I'm not even talking about in the city itself, where you have rival adventurers, or thieves, or problems with the local constabulary or politicians, negotiations with a church for services, or, okay, you want us to raise your friend, you don't have the money, fine. We will do that for you if you go off and do this in the dungeon you're already going to be exploring. You have all these other opportunities for role-playing in the city itself. But beyond that, in the dungeon, it is easy to have groups of quote-unquote monsters that you can do other things than engage in combat. You can negotiate with them, you can intimidate with them, you can, for example, if you find out, okay, here's a tribe of gnolls inhabiting this one part of the cavern, and they've got a blood feud with some goblins in this other part of the caverns, you can play them off each other, you can lead them into each other, or you can even go in and negotiate with them and say, hey, if you need help, we will negotiate free passage through your territory in return for getting rid of those gnolls, and you can set up role-playing, if the players are agreeable, you can set up role-playing scenarios within the dungeon itself, and it can be as rewarding as any other type of role-playing. Just because it's a dungeon crawl, and just because it's a dungeon crawl where players are assumed to drop in and out, doesn't mean you have to sacrifice all of that interesting stuff that comes with role-playing.
I got a lot of questions about that too. That's a really good point, because when I was emailing around trying to drum up players who might be interested, I got a couple of questions of, how much. This sounds like a boring dungeon crawl. How much opportunity is there for role playing? It's sort of a misleading question, but. I mean, the answer is that it's up to the players, right?
Yeah, the answer is exactly. It's up to the players what you want to do. And okay, so it's taking a step back from that. Yes, it's up to the players what you want to do, but what you can do as a game master is throw out a bunch of leads and then just follow up on whichever ones the players seem to think are important. If they zero in on a particular character, they think that character is cool, follow up on that. And if they ignore ones, that's why you don't have to work everything out in super detail. Is just give them the opportunity, like, maybe they come up to the gnolls, and I'm just using the gnolls as an example because they popped into my head. Maybe they come up to the gnoll encampment and they're ready to attack, but the gnolls come out with a white flag on a stick. They're trying to negotiate or trying to surrender. Okay, that's an opportunity for role-playing. If the players take it up, then you've got something going on. If they choose to attack, well, they chose combat over an opportunity to interact. I don't even know the intelligence score of gnolls. Are they actually intelligent enough to interact with? I just pulled that out of my rear as an example monster. It's the first name that came to mind.
Sure.
Did that answer the question for us, though?
What about your experience running a game like that, Brian?
I haven't tried running a game like that. By the way, Noel's average intelligence is 8.
8,
so,
okay.
Yeah,
slow, but not stupid.
Yeah. You nolophobe.
They're like your average Twitter user, I'd say.
Oh, there goes our audience. Good night, everybody.
No, you were saying, Brian, you had a comment that you couldn't get in. What were you going to say?
No, I was just calling you a stealth nolophobe.
Oh, okay.
I told everyone in the chat about that.
I mean, they have to. If players want role-playing, they have to take the opportunity for role-playing. They can't just expect it to drop in their laps. I mean, if they want to, they can wander into a shop and say, well, I buy this and this and that, and then go out. Or you can give them the opportunity to describe the shop just enough that if they are interested, they can engage in, talking with the proprietor, put a strange shield on the wall that indicates, hey, they might have once at one time belonged to this cool knightly company. I'm thinking in the Forgotten Realms, one of the things that I don't like the Forgotten Realms. Generally, one of the things I did like in the Forgotten Realms was their concept of chartered adventuring companies, where you had a large group of people who were all part of the same company, and different parts of that company would break off and go on different adventures. Well, if you want to encourage role-playing, you put a shield on the wall with the sigil of one of these famous companies or groups of adventurers, and you just kind of mention it's there as part of the description. Now, if they're interested, they can say, oh, hey, that's something I can ask the proprietor about. You leave these little breadcrumbs to where if they're interested in doing something, they can engage in it, but if they're not, you don't force them to it. The only reason dungeon crawls are said to be boring is because a lot of people got away from what the challenge in a dungeon crawl was. Dungeon crawls, and I'm not saying this is, and so you can do as much role-playing as you want in a dungeon crawl if that's what you want to do. But let me take a step back, too. Actually, let me stop before I take a step back and give you guys a chance to comment on that.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment. This has raised several fascinating prospects for discussion here, because I totally agree with what you said about people having lost the spirit of the dungeon crawl. And I have an anecdote about that actually ties into an ethereal, where one of the elder statesmen of my first D&D group, the guy who really got me into it and been playing since original Dungeons & Dragons, talked about how that happened to his group, where they were all a bunch of really smart guys, all very left-brained, and they eventually, exhausted the rules and figured out the optimal approach to any particular square in any dungeon. And this came to be enshrined as the formula with a capital F, right? Years before, Tyler Durden did it in Fight Club. So,
I love that so much. Sorry to interrupt. I love that so much that they did that. They believe that they effectively solved D&D.
Oh, they did. Well, you love it now. The GM really didn't, because the game devolved into was basically this. They would get to the dungeon and like step into the first square, and then like the party leader would tell the GM, "Okay, we apply the formula," and he'd be like, "Okay," because then with every square, it devolved into 5 to 10 minutes, depending on what he had planned there, of the GM sitting there and just making checks to see what they discovered. Because the formula was basically like, thief searches for traps, everyone attempts to disbelieve, everyone, like makes a search, everyone, like the wizard detects magic, is just like, all sensors set to full scan with every character. And then they come back and he just like hand them the results of what they found. Okay, next square, apply the formula. Okay, we're gonna go in the next room and like play hacky sack or something while the GM grinds the numbers. And yeah, it just and repeat for weeks. And so I put a nod to that in my book, because the precision killer ex-mercenary Teg, who's very OCD, basically does this, and he calls it the formula. Like anytime he gets into, like, he's confronted by a potentially trapped door, or like a safe that might break to explode, he takes his time, like intimately examining every crevice of it.
That GM needed a large dose of maliciousness and creativity, because right off the top of my head, my thinking is, okay, then what we need at this point, do either of you watch Supernatural?
I've seen a couple episodes, and I have respect for the show, yes.
Okay, one of the characters in Supernatural is Loki. Loki, the trickster god of the Norse, who has complete control over reality. He can summon up creatures and beings that appear to be real but are not. Okay, let's take a step back. Let's not make it a god. Let's make it an unbound genie. An unbound genie who can warp time, space, and distance, not time travel, but they can make it seem like you've been walking for 10 hours, and in reality you've only covered 5 feet down the corridor. They can make it seem like you've gone into this whole big wing of the dungeon, but you haven't. With enough creativity and maliciousness, you can make things challenging for your players. And as long as you give them an opportunity to overcome this somehow, with ways, typically this is what I would do. I would get really mean and make it so that they could only overcome it not through rolling checks, but through using their wit and thought and thinking. I would go find the most diabolical trap in something that they don't know anything about, like a video game they've never played or something, and use one of those, or try to come up with it myself, or go talk to a friend online or across the city and have them develop a trap that you have to think your way out of, or you have to role play your way out of the situation and throw that at your players. His problem is not that his players were so smart that they solved the dungeon. His problem is that he wasn't thinking outside of his self-imposed limitations. At that point, once the players have figured out the rules you're operating under, it's time to expand the rules or alter the rules in fair ways to give them something more to learn. And this is why. One of the primary pleasures in gameplay is that whenever you solve a problem in life, you get this surge of pleasure in your brain. So once and it applies to anything. The problem could be in how to set up a football play to beat an opponent. It could be how to solve a problem that you have with your car. It could be anything. But in games, in role-playing games, that solving of problems comes with dealing with the rules. And his problem is he wasn't giving them any new challenges to overcome.
Yeah, you nailed it. And let me say, since I was asked about my GMing style, lack of maliciousness has never been my problem. I have problems with that. I got 99 problems with lack of maliciousness, ain't one of them. My party that I've been playing with for quite a while now had developed a list of rules for to induct newbies into my games, and the first three are: 1, never give the GM ideas; 2, never give the GM ideas; 3, never give the GM ideas.
You're one of those guys where, in one of those systems where you can take bonuses and penalties at the beginning. I forget what they're called. Disadvantages. That if you're going to take the enemy disadvantage, you might as well get the full 5-point enemy disadvantage, because the DM's going to make it that anyway. It's going to happen.
Yeah, well, like what Daddy Warpig just said about an unbound genie trapping the characters in an illusion where they think they've solved the dungeon they haven't. Yeah, I've done that. And they loved it.
Come to think of it, genies in Supernatural actually do exactly that. So I didn't have to start with Loki. If I had thought about it, I could have gone right to the genie. But yeah, if you want to have some good ideas for this, check out the 2 or 3 episodes that feature genies in Supernatural. I'm just talking to anybody listening. If you're going to do this like a game master, check out those 2 or 3 episodes with genies, because yeah, they show you how to do that really, really well, and give you ideas on how to allow players to role play themselves out of those situations.
Well, I won't claim Brian's level of evil, but I did have a really good first session with it. We had a few people who, no matter how many times I repeated it, didn't quite get the "this is a mega dungeon and I don't care who shows up each week" sort of thing. And 2 players, or all the players did some sort of a fun character. They didn't spend too much time on character background, but like they thought about character background, and I was like, oh, you poor people. And 2 of them did fall to a grossly overpowered encounter. Actually, I'm gonna have to tweak the actual encounters in the dungeon I'm running, but
yes, please.
It feels good.
I started playing a mega dungeon. It was Necromancer Games Rappin' Athic. And the very first room in the dungeon, that's not even in the dungeon, it's the entrance to the dungeon, is an instant kill trap. And the only way to get out of it is to think your way out of it, to figure out the clue, and get out of it quickly enough that you don't get murdered. And I just thought, wow, that's awesome.
That's so messed up.
Very first room, if you're not paying attention and you don't choose to do the right thing, your character is just dead. Nothing you can do about it. But if you do the right thing, you can get out of there.
The best GMs are all awful evil.
Yeah. So I mean, if you're going to run the adventure, do you have no choice but to throw character after character into the meat grinder until someone figures it out?
We figured it out and didn't die. It wasn't that hard to figure out, but you have to pay attention. You have to be, willing to listen and think about where you're on the room, what the physical situation is, and then react to it as if it were an actual room. Rolling dice wasn't part of it. You weren't allowed. It just wasn't a skill check. It was it was the player themselves having to think. And throwing more characters in there wouldn't really do anything for you, because they just get squished until you happen to come up with happen to think about the situation. It wasn't a hard thing to do, but it was inexorable. You just could not escape it by rolling dice, and it wasn't it's a DC 20 save. No, it's a you're dead save unless you.
Which would be good for Dorrinal's open table concept, because you have a theoretically unlimited supply of characters to feed into the meat grinder.
Absolutely. In fact, the overpowered encounter in session had wights, a monster in D&D that have an energy drain.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, and their stats really aren't that bad, but when you get to the part of the energy drain where it says, oh yeah, and if they go below level 1, they die. And I'm like, oh, so every successful hit probably kills them.
Okay, so we know you're using D&D 3.5. What mega dungeon? Are you running a pre-planned mega dungeon or your own?
Yeah, I'm using the one suggested by Alexander, the Caverns of Thracia. This is a really old, one of the oldest mega dungeons. I think it was written in '76 or something like that. Necromancer Games redid a bunch of the old Judges Guild games. Judges Guild is the company that published the Captains of Thracia.
Okay.
And Necromancer Games wrote or updated most of the Judges Guild library to 3.5 under the Sword and Sorcery label
Right.
years ago. And so I've got that adventure updated for 3.5, and I'm running that. So where his example is the same dungeon, but he's doing it in actually original D&D, I've decided to use 3.5 because I'm not that old, and 3.5 is my most comfortable system. It's worth pointing out. Yeah, and it's worth pointing out that I'm actually a new DM. I have DM'd in the past, and by DM'd in the past, I mean when I was in high school.
Well, right on. Never too late to learn. By the way, we have a comment. Bradford Walker says, I remember that trap. It's still today at the gaming den for what they define as bad GMs.
I don't really blame anybody for having that sentiment. I mean, I appreciate what Daddy Warpig said about making the players think and figure it out, but on the other hand, instant death at the beginning of the dungeon doesn't sound like fun for anybody else.
I can only point to Rapid being an incredibly popular dungeon with both players and GMs.
Yeah, actually, I considered was also converted by Necromancer Games, so I almost ran that too. But now that I know what that first trap is, maybe I'll hold off.
Well, look, a trap is a tool, and like any tool, it can be applied correctly or incorrectly. Now, if you've got a party that are doing well, they're staying in character, they're on their toes, keeping side talk to a minimum, and putting the damn phones down and don't have their faces buried in Twitter the whole game, then you don't need that trap. The GM from the game I mentioned, with characters who are just coasting through and having them crunch numbers, he needed that trap.
Yeah.
If people are showing up and just eating your pizza and drinking your Mountain Dew and taking up space and using the game that you have slaved to put together as just an excuse to mingle and have a polite social gathering, yeah, man, screw it. Attach the meat grinder attachment to that dungeon.
And you say Mountain Dew, and I have to relate this, is that the place where we played was also the place where I work, where they provide soft drinks.
Ooh.
And I took a break during character creation. I said, okay, I need to get a drink. Can I get anybody anything? And somebody at the table, I shit you not, asked for Mountain Dew. I just could not believe it. It felt like I was back in high school. And of course, I immediately recalled to mind that sketch that everybody knows.
The Dr. Demento one?
Yes.
Yeah.
Coincidentally, I was at Taco Bell the other day, and I tried their Mountain Dew icy drink thing. It's terrible. It doesn't taste like Mountain Dew at all.
Aw.
So hold on. It doesn't taste like Mountain Dew, but it's still terrible?
Yeah.
Would it have been better if it had tasted like Mountain Dew?
Yeah, because it didn't taste like much of anything. Mostly it tasted like ice.
Huh.
So it was like a bad snow cone.
Yeah. Yeah, like they took a snow cone and took every single thing they had out. Every single iota of taste out of the snow cone. That's what it tasted like. Very disappointed.
So get back on the subject of D&D. You guys are familiar with the system, and you guys have been DMing for a long time. Do you have any advice for me or any other new DMs who might be hanging out and gabbing with us? Just out of the blue, what kind of advice do you have for me?
If you're doing 3.5, change the persuasion rules. They might have done that in 3.5 because it's the 3.0 persuasion rules that were broken. And be very, very careful about what third-party stuff you let in. Third-party feats, third-party prestige classes have a big tendency, especially if you combine them from multiple sources, they have a big tendency to blow up your game.
Oh, I see. I definitely headed that off because I didn't want to expose myself to that sort of balance. I'm sticking with core only to start, and the downside to that is that, man, the core feats are really boring.
They're boring?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
if you're a fighter, you can pick a shtick or two and sort of take the feats that do that, and so they're pretty cool for fighters. But for everybody who's making a character who wasn't a fighter, they were like, I have one feat and I don't care. Well, what am I going to take with this one feat? I don't know. Anyway,
I
that's
like my house rolled toughness feat. I thought that was a good feat.
how did you change that? I mean, toughness is obviously one of the worst feats ever.
It just gives you 3 hit points, 3 flat hit points. I changed toughness because they did this in Neverwinter Nights. I changed toughness to be +1 hit point per level.
Oh yeah, Pathfinder did that. If you're not familiar with Pathfinder, they just basically took D&D 3.5 and house ruled most of the clunky stuff away to make it Pathfinder is actually really good. I would have done it if I were more familiar with it. Their rule was that, except that they front load the first 3 levels. You get +3 hit points at level 1, and then starting at level 4, you get an additional hit point per level.
Oh, that's even better.
Yeah. Pathfinder is the Frankenstein monster that, or more like the atomic Superman that Wizards of the Coast accidentally created that then killed them.
Yep.
Yeah, put them in a coma at least. But that's a whole other show.
Oh boy.
Oh, speaking of which, we are out of time. How come we've never done role-playing games before? That's my question. How come we've never talked about role-playing games before? Like, ever?
I don't know.
I don't know, but if I keep running this game once a week, I'm going to bring it up a lot more often because I love talking about it.
Oh, by the way, Bradford Walker clarifies that the Gaming Den are all basically a bunch of dry-eyed, cold-hearted math magicians who think that any time that the numbers and rules governing the game depart from the narrative is bad gaming.
I have hung out on the Gaming Den because it has a huge nest of Shadowrun fans, and the guy who owns it, whose name I can't remember right now, he was doing some really interesting stuff with an alternate Shadowrun setting. He was like revamping Shadowrun's setting and rules, and it was really, really interesting, but then he stopped and hasn't been doing anything more on it. Not that I have a leg to stand on criticizing people who are doing that. But so I've been on the Gaming Den. I've read some of the things they do. They're definitely on the heavy Asperger's end of the role-playing spectrum.
And there's a place for that.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that's bad. I'm not saying that's wrong, but
I'm not trying to insult anyone from the Gaming Den. Just different styles.
You just have to understand that when you go there, that's what you're going to get, which is fine. So, okay, final comments. I'd like to actually come back and do role-playing again because this is completely different from the other stuff we've done, and obviously there's a whole lot of ideas and opinions and material that we've never covered before. So we'll see about doing something role-playing related maybe next week because I think there's some other stuff I wouldn't mind talking about there. So, Brian, last thoughts, last comment.
Yes, well, I'm going to give Bradford Walker the last comment here because I'm reading the comments. He says, one of the first places that he first saw you, Daddy Warpig, was at the Gaming Den.
Yep, I was posting about my alternate Shadowrun setting that I actually later abandoned.
It happens.
Dorrinal, last comment.
Oh, thanks for listening and talking about the game and everything. I'm looking forward to continuing to learn to be a DM, and anything that comes up in my weekly games, I will bring up at the Gab.
Cool. All right, folks. Thanks for tuning in for the Dungeons and the Dragons episode, Geek Gab, episode 26. Once a week or so, at some kind of probably Saturday afternoonish or Sunday afternoonish. Check us out on YouTube. Give us a follow or not. And we appreciate y'all for tuning in. If you have any other comments or questions, shoot us or requests for show topics, shoot us tweets or email or whatever. And from Dorrinal, Brian, and me, Daddy Warpig, we will be back.